Thank you very much, Councillor Whitehead. Our next speaker is Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Mayor. And before I begin, I just wanted to acknowledge Mr. Paul Johnson and his very patient, thoughtful, and measured responses through what has become feeling a bit like a war of attrition. But here we are in the afternoon, and I'll try to the best of my ability, not duplicate, cover, or rebuttal anything that was said. But there is one point that I wanted to raise as a point of courtesy. Something was raised earlier to an earlier presenter about releasing data on a survey they did. It's been my experience, Mr. Deputy Mayor, that around this table, when issues in other councillors' wards are brought to your attention, the courtesy that we have at least has been my experience, is you forward that information on to the ward councillors that are affected by that particular complaint. So for me to hear for the first time today, after various LRT committee meetings, that 72 people have reached out to a councillor outside of his ward to complain about this project without having had the courtesy of having any of that information forwarded on to the affected ward councillors is very disconcerting, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I didn't call a point of order when it was said, but I did want to make that known that in the future, should issues be, especially if you're on the LRT subcommittee, brought up to you that are affecting wards that are outside of your district, that you would provide us the courtesy to forward that information on to the affected ward councillors. It's certainly a courtesy that we extend to everybody else, and it's one that I hope to continue. Otherwise, I wouldn't want to see myself spending time, canvassing and surveying Upper James and Concession and Rymal and really just, creeping outside of what I was elected to do, which is represent the people in Ward 3. So having said all of that and put that etiquette aside, that's my ask. I do have a couple of questions for Mr. Hope, and I'm encouraged by his name, Mr. Hope. If you could just, for instance, talk about, I know that in Scarborough, for instance, there was a cost of cancelling LRT, and I do understand that was because trucks had already been designed. Is it safe to say that that Metrolinx has already invested some money to date here in Hamilton?
We have created a staff team, so we have incurred costs to start to build our team to implement the project. We've also, through the memorandum of agreement, agreed to pay for the costs of city staff that are working on the project in our joint project office, and we are paying the costs of the environmental assessment consultant, Steer Davies Cleave, as well as we have just concluded a contract with AECOM, as Paul mentioned earlier today, to provide technical advisory services for the project, and that's really the detailed engineering work that will take place over the next year or two leading up to financial close, and that is a $50 million contract.
And so I've heard lots of conversation now, this kind of reinvigorated debate, BRT versus LRT, and of course I could definitely dig down on all the details, operational costs, and so on and so forth. It feels like it's been decided multiple times here again and again, but is it safe to say that we've already invested substantial dollars in the design elements of LRT? Is that safe to say at this point in the implementation phase, this far down the line?
Through the chair, yes, that's safe to say.
Okay, so I'll just put that to bed. Given Brampton's reversal on support for their project, I know that both Toronto and Cambridge became very interested in these dollars that were freed up from that project. Andrew, if you could speak to maybe the scope or some of the examples of the near 70 other big move projects that are on the go here across the province, and how, going back on this particular $1 billion investment, we'll certainly see hopes raised on councils across the province and seeing their projects funded. Are there any other shovel-ready projects? I believe there's maybe 15 to 20 shovel-ready projects across the province that would benefit should we decide not to go forward with the $1 billion investment? 71 total big move projects. Out of them, 15 shovel-ready. Which ones?
So through the chair, I would just say to that, we do have, as you referenced, the big move, which is our 25-year regional transportation plan, covers the entire region, the GTA and Hamilton areas. And basically, that plan is a 25-year plan, $50 billion to build a network of rapid transit lines, about 1,200 kilometers of rapid transit lines in total across our entire region. So there are a number of projects that have been identified as priority projects under that plan. The Hamilton LRT project was one of those projects. To help implement that plan, the province has announced over the past 5 to 6 years a number of major transit funding investments. The most recent was through the Moving Ontario Forward plan, which is where this project received its funding from last year, along with funding for the Regional Express Rail program and the Huron-Ontario Main LRT project as well in Mississauga. So there are a number of other projects that are unfunded at the current time that we're certainly looking for opportunities to provide funding for.
And so, Mr. Hope, given the size and scale of infrastructure investment across the province, understanding the workforce demand that it is going to create in terms of economic stimulus, on a project scope the size of Hamilton's projected project scope, roughly how many workers would it take to employ to build something of this scale?
So directly, I'll go back to the comments that my former Chief Capital Officer made when he spoke before the LRT committee back in September, shortly after the project was announced. And he said directly working on the project, when we get up to speed, there will be about 100 employees working on the project. But actually, when you look at when you get into the construction phase and you take the direct and indirect employment impacts, I'd refer back to the number that was in the benefits case analysis done in 2010, which was in the order of 5,700 person years of employment was the anticipated employment impact of the LRT option.
I do apologize. When I hear person years, I think of Tim Hudak, so I won't go too far down that line, but I will say this, that given the scope of infrastructure investment across the province, is it safe to say that they're out of the 100, and I'll stick with the 100 because it's what I know best in terms of the economics and the numbers, that some of those folks are going to be local, given that there's going to be these builds right across the province? Is there a local component to the employment?
Through the chair. So typically what happens on large projects like this is you hire a consortium to actually lead the development of the project, but they rely a lot on local sub-trades and sub-trades to actually carry out the work. So we do anticipate that there would be significant impacts locally. We don't have an exact number yet because we're not through the procurement phase, but that would be our expectation.
When you does Metrolinx or does the province have procurement policies as it relates to unions in this area? Like I could think of perhaps LIUNA, the Carpenters Union, some of the steel, depending on where materials are coming from and all that stuff, certainly utilities. Can you just maybe speak to that? Because if that is the case, then one can only surmise that or conclude that some of the locals will be employed in that regard. And the reason why I bring that up, Mr. Deputy Mayor, is because this talk about it only affecting four wards, I think, is short-sighted. And some of the best arguments I've had coming out of Labour is that this is indeed a massive scope given our economy and an opportunity for people across the city that are employed in trades to be able to work for 5 years. 5 years. So this isn't just about transit. This is about employment. And in a city where we're hard to come by, where we've sat around this table fighting around, what I think detrimental businesses coming to our city on the prospect of 20 jobs for a short period of time, like we're talking about 100. So with that regard, Mr. Hope, what other local procurement opportunities and or community benefits have been put forward in other jurisdictions as it relates to constructions along the corridor?
Through the chair, so one of the there's a couple of things here. So the province has recently passed, it was Bill 6, I can't recall the exact name of the legislation, but it does require that for large infrastructure investments that we do implement community benefits frameworks. So that is the law of the land. I know the province is developing more detailed regulations to go along with that. We received direction from our board to negotiate and implement community benefits frameworks for the Eglinton and Finch projects and we will be going back to our board, planning to go back to our board in June to seek similar direction for both the Hamilton and Huron Ontario projects. So the objective for community benefits frameworks is really to ensure that the benefits associated with the construction of these projects filters down to the local community through employment opportunities, apprenticeships, and the like, and that becomes part of the formal agreement with the consortium that will deliver the project.
And so you brought up a very good point. It's now called the Huronia Project in Brampton. The Brampton section used to be the Huronia Main Project. Turning down the Main Street component, I believe, resulted in a give back to the province of roughly $200 to $300 million. Did Brampton then have the choice of where they're spending this windfall of extra money? Did that ever enter into the equation where they can redirect that money into whims or wishes on their list, or did that money go back to the province?
The chair, when Brampton Council made its decision back in the fall that didn't want to proceed with the project as it was planned, that funding was returned to the Moving Ontario Forward Fund, the portion in Brampton.
So we're under no illusions around this table that we're going to take $1 billion and put it somewhere else and do something else with it. I think we all understand that. I think we've all understood that from the beginning of this conversation, probably 10 years ago as it started. But I'm very interested in the community benefits aspect of this particular project, because I feel like one of the things that we're not doing well, Mr. Deputy Mayor and members of council, and maybe it's because it's so early, is really highlighting the massive impact that this potentially can have. So to Jason Thorne, what tools could we use or have been suggested around the development of the LRT corridor as it relates to community benefits, be it affordable housing, be it other community benefits? What types of things can we see from the planning and ECDEV side that we might have control over as a municipality? Non-binding, of course, just thinking out loud here, Jason. I don't want to put you in a bind.
So through the chair, I know in terms of the community benefits agreement type projects, the ones that have come up most frequently have been some of, I think it was alluded to earlier, have been some of the skills training opportunities, the sort of small business training, entrepreneurial training opportunities, marketing skills training for some of the affected businesses. Those are the kinds of things that we've heard have been successful in other jurisdictions.
So lots of different opportunities for us to be creative to make sure that this is a potentially 100 workers for 5 years. We know they're not going to be all from wards 1 to 4. There's going to be a citywide implication on those workers. So when you talk about it having a citywide effect, we're keeping that in mind. But this last question, because this has been something that I found very curious, Mr. Deputy Mayor, is this renewed interest in public transit citywide. And so I'd like to explore that for a moment, because I feel like this conversation has been pitted in a bit of an either-or scenario as it relates to our own investment in public transit. So my question through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, to either Mike Zagaric or John Mader or anybody else, and we know when Mr. Dixon came and presented his 10-year plan, the $300 million price tag, it shocked us all. There's no doubt about that, myself included, being a big supporter of public transit. I think the cost of the bus barn for myself personally is still a bit debatable in terms of some of the assets we have in the city. But let's, for argument's sake, use the $300 million that have been put about. What's stopping us from actually funding that anyways? Mike, where could we potentially fund $300 million in citywide public transit investment as a municipality, as it is our responsibility to do in this particular deal?
And sorry, that's a question for Jason?
Probably for Mike or for John or for Chris or for whomever. What's stopping us as a municipality from going ahead and finding a way to finance that $300 million investment?
Who would like to venture an answer?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I can share what our current practice is as it relates to conventional transit. Our funding sources for conventional transit represents primarily fare box and levy. I believe the fare box now represents about 46% of the cost of conventional transit, as well as grants or subsidies, and that's principally the provincial gas tax of just in excess of $10 million. So in terms of the conventional financing strategy, it would represent a combination of levy and fare box. And the fare box, in terms of our current 10-year transit strategy, I believe the maintenance facility is outside of the current scope, and therefore it would have an impact in terms of the transit fare, current transit fare forecasts, as well as our debt forecasts. So a investment in the range of about $200 to $300 million would require some additional debt. It would require council to review our current debt forecast and confirm a revised debt forecast. And then, as I mentioned previously, it would require council to revisit the fare forecast going forward and consider amending the fare forecast.
That's given what we've always done, not necessarily what we could do. So in that line of reasoning, when you talk about the gas tax, how much does the city receive in total in gas taxes?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, we receive approximately $10 million plus in provincial gas tax revenue, which is dedicated to transit. We receive an additional $30 million annually in federal gas tax, of which $28 million goes to roads, bridges, sidewalks, and approximately $3 million goes towards transit.
We're using about a quarter rate now for public transit, 3/4 for our public infrastructure. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, that's correct.
And given the recent federal budgets, I'm seeing, as well as in some other municipalities, other funding in infrastructure. We've talked very hypothetically around this table, but I'd like to talk hypothetically around that budget. Are there potential opportunities for infrastructure investments from the federal government as it relates to either investing in public transit or reprioritizing our money and having that money from the feds go to some of our infrastructure, roads and sidewalks programs, and then allowing us to free up money for public transit? Is there an opportunity from the federal flow of dollars in this budget for infrastructure projects of that nature that might mitigate some of those costs?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, the federal government has announced, I would describe it as three envelopes as it relates to infrastructure. One is the green envelope, infrastructure initiatives with a green focus, either energy efficiency or other environmental benefits. The other envelope is the new build program, which we will wait to have a better understanding of criteria. There could be opportunities as it relates to that particular envelope. The one related envelope is the transit fund. The transit fund commitment is based on ridership. I believe Ontario is targeted to receive somewhere in the area of $1.4 billion. And based on ridership, I believe the City of Hamilton's percentage of ridership within the province of Ontario is somewhere in the area of 2.2%, and that would put us in the range of about $34 to $36 million in dedicated transit funding. So again, staff will come forward once we have a better understanding of the criteria of that program. That funding, again, that is federal funding, not clear whether or not there will be any requirement from the province to provide any matching funding or contribution. The funding will flow from the federal government to provincial governments, and so we will await the contribution agreements to be executed between the federal and provincial governments. Once we understand the language of those agreements, we will come before council with that information and seek direction as to what those priorities will be. But again, specific to the transit fund, we are expecting that Hamilton would receive somewhere in the range of $34 to $36 million in direct federal funding.
Mr. Zagaric, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I can't tell you how encouraging that is. And my hope is that it alleviates some of the concerns and anxieties around the table to not look at this billion-dollar investment as a burden, but a huge opportunity for us to leverage, reprioritize, rejig how we do our funding to tap into upper levels of government. It's safe to say that for the last 10 years, we hadn't had that. We hadn't had that kind of investment. We certainly hadn't had that kind of investment around the table for public transit. All those years of 0% increases have a residual effect. That's a deferred cost on the riders. as we keep going back to the box to try to fund our public transit. So to hear at the feds potentially leveraging some additional monies from the province, to hear that we can have 100 workers in and across our city working for 5 years, to hear that in other areas, supported by small business, that there's actually been almost immediate renewal in terms of how some of them have been able to navigate this. Also understanding the 71 other big move projects on the go across the province. I think we're getting a very clear sense for what's at stake when we toy with this type of billion-dollar investment. And so I certainly appreciate hearing from you, Mr. Hope. Paul, I think you've done a fantastic job in navigating this file with your presentations, both of the LRT subcommittee. I want to thank your staff as well for taking the time to begin this process of going door to door, because I am still very concerned when I'm hearing other councillors speaking on behalf of my constituents, my residents, my business owners, when I'm not hearing what they're hearing. There's a disconnect. And so I feel connected to my community in that way and look forward to continuing that conversation. So, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I'd like to thank all those people, Mr. Zagarek, John, all of you guys for being able to walk me through that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At this stage, I have second-time speakers only, no more first-time speakers.